Hey everyone, it's Norm from Tested, and today's show and tell is another 3D printing showcase. Gonna share with you some of my recent adventures in resin-based 3D printing and things I've really enjoyed printing lately, as well as some processes that I've been tinkering with. So first of all, a recent find that I found on my mini factory is an artist that goes by the Lazy Forger. Now, my mini factory is a really wonderful marketplace full of artists and modelers who sell designs that are maybe primarily used for maybe miniatures or tabletop gaming. And I'm not that big of a tabletop gamer myself, but I really appreciate a lot of that art that's put up there. And of course, you can download models that you can have just as display pieces or use in really any kind of fun hobbyist way. And this artist that goes by the Lazy Forger has a whole set of tabletop gaming designs, from characters, tiny army pieces, to vehicles, to also terrain sets. And in the world of terrain, there are a lot of options to buy little things that you can build your battlefields with, right? And what really caught my eye was this particular set of a city, of an Asian city, like really right out of a metropolis in Japan. And so what I have here is some of these prints. This is printed in a mint color resin that I really like. This is Elegoo's ABS-like resin. And this set has 14 different buildings that are at 6mm scale. So that's 1/285th scale. Really tiny, and that means that you can print a lot of these buildings and create some really interesting display sets. So when we take a closer look at this, you can see just a ton of detail on these buildings, and they're really, really wide-ranging. So just like two different apartment buildings, you have the kind of storefronts, you have these just intricate staircases, you look at the rooftops that have just all sorts of really, really cool detail. The windows have, air conditioning units, they're satellite dishes, and architecturally, they read as, apartment buildings from, kind of anywhere in the world, but here specifically, a design to evoke the look of the apartments that you'd find in somewhere in Asia. Along with these big apartment buildings, there are also these tiny houses with these nice kind of graded rooftops. You have storefronts. And everything is just so lovely detailed. I printed these at 0.05mm thickness, which is standard for resin printers. And even at that thickness, these all printed perfectly. They do come in both unsupported and supported versions. I added my own supports, but I did take a cue from their supported models by angling these 10 degrees. So if you're gonna print these out, 10 degrees works really well, so they don't take up too much of your build plate, and you can stack a set of these, 9 or 10 of these, on like an Elegoo Saturn, and using my support settings very easily just to tear off the supports. They're even pre-hollowed out, so they don't take a ton of resin, and they're just have a great presence. I just love the look of these miniatures. The biggest building here is this one, so let's give you a sense of that. Again, you see just every floor has just nice varied detail, satellite dishes here, a really, really detailed rooftop, and just a really, really nice piece. If we recall, a while back, we actually used some of these prefab Japanese skyscraper sets. This is the Geocraper series of tiny dioramas, and this is at 1/2500th scale. And we use these, encased them in resin, and kind of created this post-apocalyptic underwater cities. But these are kind of tough to find. They're imported from Japan, they're a little expensive. And so when I saw the Lazy Forger's take on the Japanese architecture, it really allows me to use those, scale them down a little bit more, or even use it at that 6mm scale, and I could make more of these dioramas at basically just the cost of resin. Speaking of dioramas, I did put together a bunch of these into a quick makeshift diorama just to give you a sense of how these can be laid out into a cityscape. And just the density of these, it reads so well. The variation of the 14 different buildings stacked together. You can imagine the little alleyways. Imagine it looks like a slice out of a bustling city that now I've put onto this milled piece of wood. And at the center here, this is actually a display stand that I borrowed from one of my 6-scale figures. This is one of the Hot Toys dynamic flight sands. So it's rigid rod here with a grip, and this part screws into the bottom. And so I just tap the base of this piece of wood so it could accommodate this stand. And now I have the option of using this diorama as the base for any type of figure that I want. And the thing I had in mind, a Gundam kit. And so this is a Turn A Gundam. This is actually a design that Sid Mead did. Sid Mead did a couple designs for Gundam's Turn A series, and I really love the look of this guy. And I think it perfectly fits, even though this is 1/100th scale, and of course that terrain is 1/285th scale, but let's say it's forced perspective, right? But if I clip this onto the flight display stand, and kind of give it a little bit of a dynamic flight pose here. Oh yeah, that's cool. What I have now is a really quick and dirty makeshift diorama for this Gundam. Making really good use of this Lazy Forger's Asian city 3D models. I'll have links to where you can find these in the comments and description below, and hope you have fun printing these out, painting them, and using them for your own dioramas. So next up, here's an idea that I've been tinkering with lately. This is a model that I printed a while back. It's a character from the artist Paul Braddock. Paul, I believe, is Australian. He's the one who did that really awesome Eddie robot kit that Builder and I painted, and he actually now sells that model as an STL set that you can download and print yourself. But this is just one of his alien character designs I really found striking, and I thought this would be really cool to experiment with the idea of splitting an object and doing a little bit of mixed media with resin printing. When you're printing with resin, typically you're using just one type of resin, and of course a lot of different ways that you could maybe tint that resin, or even as the print is happening, pour a different formulation of resin into the vat, so you have kind of a gradient, a transition from one type of resin into a different color or a different opacity. But if I wanted to take a model and maybe make it look like it's of two different materials completely, well, it's actually not that difficult to do because you have the 3D model. And so using software like Meshmixer, you can take any model and you can use an edit function like the plane cut function, which lets you essentially slice that model into across any plane. Super simple. You just kind of left click, drag the mouse along that plane, and it creates, basically turns one model into two or multiple pieces, multiple shells, and then fixes them so that it's all still solid. And this functionality is previously mostly used for maybe slicing up a model so it fits into your print bed. But I was thinking, what if you use that plane slicing ability to kind of bifurcate a portrait and then make it look almost like that Terminator or that kind of almost like a Jason Freeney style look, where you can have one side of a character portrait be one type of resin or painted to have one type of finish, and then the other side be maybe a translucent or clear piece. And so that's what I wanted to do with this character, and it wasn't too difficult. I went into Meshmixer, sliced it right along, and quickly realized that, even a character like this, if the portrait isn't looking directly forward, if it's not square, then slicing it's gonna be tricky. You're gonna be off axis. And thankfully, even though this is off axis, I was able to slice just the head down the middle here, and I still have the keying that fits into the base. And so I scaled this up to 150%, sliced it, and then basically with that slice model and printed it twice. Once in a opaque this pink resin, and then once in a clear resin. And the result is, well, I have the clear head here, and then a painted version of the solid one here, and when paired together, because it's perfectly aligned, it has its really interesting look. Let's see if I can give you a closer look on that. And then the body here I painted to match the solid side, and this is a really, really quick, almost like 20-minute paint up. Just kind of spray painted it black, and then use some of the red rub and buff, the ruby red rub and buff, and hit the whole thing with that. Did additional black wash to kind of get into the nooks and crannies to accentuate some of that detail, and then just hit it again with a little bit more rub and buff, this time with a patina, to make it look more like it's just like an aged statue or something. Really simple. All I really want to do was create contrast here. So have something that looks like, almost like a kind of a metallic sculpture that's aged on one side, and then, it doesn't have any, I don't have any explanation for why the head would be clear, but I just like the look here. And, I kind of over-keyed this side. That's why it tinted a little bit yellow, but it gives me a chance then to do something interesting on this left side, whether to hollow it out and maybe fill it with some material, or maybe put some lights on the inside, have this be illuminated. Again, it's just because I can, because I have access to the model that I've purchased. I can do a little bit of remixing and modifying with it, and then I can make this look less like a monolithic piece, and have a little bit of variation because I have that extra resin, and it just means I'm printing it twice. And I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. Again, I have no kind of logic in my head to why, why this character would have half solid and half clear, but yeah, has a little bit of a striking look. And I definitely consider this a process in progress. So this is by no means kind of the finished result for what I want to do with this, but it's definitely not difficult to do. Again, just using a Meshmixer, and for a paint finish like this, rub and buff goes a long way to turning lightweight resin into something that looks like it's heavy metal. So those are two projects that I've been messing around with of late, and hope that gives you some idea or inspiration for different ways to mix up 3D printing and make it a little more interesting. And let me know what you've been printing lately, and what things and artists that you've been following. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Norm, and I'll see you next time. Bye.